For the first time in almost a year, Nigeria have a new coach at their helm, and his name is Eric Chelle. The appointment is of particular importance as the AFCON is this year at the end of 2025, but more importantly, Nigeria are currently sitting nearly at the bottom of their 2026 FIFA World Cup qualifying group, and that's going to be contested throughout this calendar year. So, who is Eric Chelle? Is he the right man for the job? We'll discuss all of that and more coming up next on this episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another quick episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. My name is Maher Mizahi. I'm your host, and as always, this is brought to you by africasaCountry.com. So I just wanted to make a quick reaction video to the fact that Nigeria have hired Eric Chelle as the head coach of the Nigerian Super Eagles. And we just wanted to get into his CV, his coaching style, and ask the question at the very end, was this a good hire? And just wanted to give my opinion now, and we can always revisit this in the months to come. So, Eric Chelle, born in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, half Ivorian, half Malian. His father is Ivorian, his mother is from Mali. Played most of his career in the second division in France for a few different clubs as a center half, a defender. And he's mostly he made 5 appearances for the Malian national team. I don't know if I already said that or not. But since then, he's mostly been based in the south of France. So in the Marseille region, Martigues, around there. He's 47 years old. And what's interesting about him is that he comes, I call it the Aliou Cissé blueprint. What we saw over the last almost 10 years now of African football is many African nations break away from hiring from that, sorry to use these terms, but that old white European carousel of coaches that just jump from job to job to job to job. Many of them mediocre, not all of them, but many of them were mediocre. And what they started to do instead was give opportunities to former internationals that started to get their coaching badges. So Aliou Cissé really was the first case from Senegal, gets his the pro UEFA license diploma or the equivalent, and then gets a chance with the Senegalese national team after being with the Olympic team. We saw the same thing happen with Jamal Belmadi from Algeria. At the last AFCON, we saw Kaba Diawara from Guinea, Walid Regragui, of course, from Morocco, and now we see it with Hussam Hassan, for example, in Egypt. So there are many, many examples of this happening, and on the most part, these appointments have worked, but we haven't really seen it from one nationality to another. We haven't seen a former Algerian international coach the Tunisian national team, or a former South African player like Benny McCarthy, who was tipped for the Bafana job, go and coach Namibia, for example. So this is one that I'm really, really interested in. Let's continue going through his CV. Previously coached at GS Consola and FC Martigues and Boulogne. These are 3 clubs that are in the lower divisions of French football. And then the Malian national team, and most recently MC Oran in the Algerian league. Now he had decent results in his first 2 gigs with Consola and Martigues. Consola now known as Atlético de Marseille. He had a horrible stint at US Bologna, where he said, I'm ashamed to be the coach of this team. And then he was pretty good with Mali, got them to the quarterfinals of the last AFCON. And his most previous gig with Oran, just okay, completely average. And so it's difficult to definitively say if he's a good coach or not. And even with all of these stints that he's had in the past, it's difficult to say what his style is. Because, for example, with Consola or Martigues, when you look at the amount of goals that his team scored, they were very, very attacking. Even with Mali, his national team scored a lot of goals, but with Boulogne, they struggled to score a goal a game. And even with Oran, most recently, they struggled to score a goal a game. So I would say that, he almost adapted more to the style of play of the leagues or the competition more than him imposing his own style. We didn't see that really, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Adaptability and versatility can be a very good thing, particularly in international football. So I'll give you just one final example. In Oran, for example, I think he was the coach for 12 or 13 matches, 12 matches, 5 wins, 5 losses, 2 draws. All of his wins were at home, all of his losses were away from home, and that is typical in the Algerian league. Um, I remember looking at the league table a few years back and seeing that every single team in the league table had a winning record at home, and every single team in the table had a tied or losing record away from home. So He didn't do anything to buck the trend. He didn't do anything to prove that he was exceptional, albeit in a short stint in Algeria. That said, in Oran, they wanted to keep him. They were paying him around 30,000 euros per month, which is a very good salary. He said that the management put him in a great situation to implement a sporting project with a long-term vision, and they didn't want him to leave. But the Super Eagles came calling, and Nigeria still has a lot of cachet. They offered him apparently, reportedly, 55,000 US dollars a month, which is a normal salary for a country of Nigeria size. I think it's similar to what Jose Peseiro was making, maybe a little bit less. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much his CV. That's what he's been through. And he couldn't say no to Nigeria. He said it's one of the best sides on the continent, probably a top three side on the continent. And we only get opportunities like this every once in a while in our career. So he had to leave Algeria, even calling himself a little bit selfish for taking the opportunity. So, um, was this a good hire? Now, before I answer yes or no, I would probably say that coaching hires in international football, you could probably split them up into two. You could probably split them up into short-term coaching hires and long-term coaching hires in international football. Now, if you think about long-term coaching hires, I would say that you're usually bringing in somebody that's not just looking to get, quick results this calendar year, for example, but somebody that's probably working with, for example, a national technical director, a DTN, as they say in French, that's going to be working with the under 15 national team, under 17 national team, under 20 national team, that's going to be meeting with perhaps different coaches in the domestic league, and saying, look, we need to. Um, have a national philosophy about how we play our football. So, I mean, the most obvious name that comes to mind is the former Uruguayan coach Oscar Tabarez, who they put in place this this process where they were basically working with those youth national teams and bringing them through in a style of football. We know Holland does the same thing, or the Netherlands, I should say. um, Qatar with Felix Sanchez, working with the youth national team, keeping the same group of players, and they practice the style of football at the under 15, under 17 level, and they sort of carry that into the senior uh, national football team. And so what really that is like, okay, we're gonna define you bring in somebody that's more of a visionary, you know, uh and they come to an agreement with the authorities and they say, okay, look, we want to play this kind of football for X, Y, or Z reason, whatever kind of football you want to play. And that's probably going to be something that you're going to judge them 5 or 10 years down the road, not 1 or 2 years down the road. I would say the majority of international footballing hires are short-term international footballing hires because, first of all, I don't need to tell you, like on our continent, unfortunately, many governments or presidents are myopic because they don't have the time or the luxury at times to put in place a long-term vision. They're under so much pressure all the time. And so because they themselves don't have 5 or 10 years, they're not going to give a coach 5 or 10 years. It's all about, can you pull me out of the mess that I'm in? And I think this is the case for Nigeria at the moment. They've qualified for the AFCON, not spectacularly, but they did a decent job in a tough group and dealing with some crazy circumstances, as we covered on this channel in Libya. But they are fifth out of sixth in World Cup qualifying, and they're in a tough group with one of the hottest teams on the African continent in South Africa, Bafana Bafana. And so they're not in a good place at the moment. Now, we've only played 4 matches. There's more than half of the games to go. It's not impossible for them to come back, but it's going to take a lot of good results and for those good results to come quickly. Now, so short term, long term. What I was saying about the Aliou Cissé blueprint, in my opinion, that's a better short term hire. Okay? Why? In general, these players, these former internationals, are seen as like big brothers, right? And so immediately they win the respect of their locker room. You could see this with Aliou Cissé and the young players. He was always had an arm over the shoulder of Sadio Mane, for example. Jamal Belmadi also with Riyad Mahrez. They became almost best friends, even though there was a coach-player dynamic, but there was also a peer-to-peer dynamic as well. Um, the players respect them because they know that this coach knows what they went through as internationals of that very country. Um, Usually, these coaches that come in, they don't need to scout. They don't need to Wikipedia all of the players that play for the national team, and they don't need to do like a huge sweeping scouting search in the domestic league because if for example, Eric Chelle is Malian or Ivorian, he's probably following the Malian national team because we all follow our own national teams, right? So you win a lot of time in that sense as well. So that's why it's another advantage for this Aliou Cissé blueprint to be a short-term model as well. On top of that, like, these former internationals, they understand the national mentality of a lot of the times the media. They've dealt with these journalists before. They know if, certain parts of the press are hostile. They know if certain parts of the press are more forgiving and accommodating, and even like the history of the national team as well. They can speak to that about the players. Um, and so there's more of a grace period as well with the public. I think the general wider public, when they see that it's a former international and a fellow compatriot, they're going to give them a little more patience as well. So for all of those reasons, I think that these short-term coaching hires in the former international blueprint model, the Aliou Cissé model, I think is good for short-term solutions. Nigeria need short-term solutions, as I said. In March, they're hosting Zimbabwe, and then they're away to Rwanda, two winnable matches. And then in September, they have tougher matches where they're away to South Africa and they're hosting Rwanda. So really, things have to be in full flow by September, but they cannot afford to lose those matches even in March. Um, Now, my question is, does this blueprint work for a coach that's not from your country? Because Eric Chelle, yes, is a former African international, but he's not Nigerian. Does he follow the Nigerian national team? Is he familiar with the Nigerian press? Will the players respect him? Um, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. We haven't really seen this where former internationals of other countries are brought in. I mean, one that comes to mind is Stephen Keshi in Togo, and that was obviously a huge success. But Stephen Keshi, had already coached the Nigerian national team. He already had so much more respect. He already coached at much bigger jobs, and he was a bigger player than Eric Shell ever was, right? Um, Stephen Keshi was also older. I'm talking about like these young coaches who have only been coaching for 5 to 7 years at the moment. And this is a different step for the Nigerian Football Federation. They've usually only, give this job to Nigerian coaches, Augustine Egwevan and Finidi George this year, previously Samson Siasia, Salisu Yusuf, Stephen Keshi, all former internationals. When they did give this job to foreigners, it was always experienced foreigners. Jose Peseiro, Gernot Rohr, older gentlemen, right? And then you have to go all the way back to before 2010 to find foreigners uh, that are not named Peseiro or Gernot Rohr. And those were Lars Lagerback and Bertie Vogts. And Lars Lagerback and Bertie Vogts, if you look at their CVs, they were coaches that they were long-term coaches for different countries. Lars Lagerback for Sweden, Bertie Vogts for Germany. And so I think Nigeria was saying, okay, if we're going to bring in a foreigner, we're going to bring in a foreigner with a long-term project. Now they didn't stay for that long-term project in Nigeria, but I think that is the logic of the NFF traditionally is if we're going to bring in a foreigner, we're going to give him, it's going to be somebody exceptional with a long-term vision and we're going to let him work. Whereas if we're going to bring in, a Nigerian, maybe we can judge them a little bit more harshly on a game by game basis. So Eric Shell it's a weird one, right? He's a foreigner technically, but he's also African. Amadou Pinnick pointed to the fact that he's black as well. He's a brother. We should give him a chance. Na 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 na. Me personally, I'm a little bit ambivalent about it. I think that the model of former international works, particularly when um, it's somebody from your country, somebody like Sunday Olise, for example. That would have been perhaps a choice of mine. Um, But I agree that you need a short-term solution. You don't need a long-term solution at the moment because qualifying to the World Cup is such a big thing. I was listening to Amadou Pinnick again speak, and he was talking about, the huge Nigerian diaspora in the US, and it's true. In that tri-state area, you have so many Nigerians, and it's such an important thing for for Nigeria to be at the United World Cup in 2026 that they don't have any luxury of wasting any time. They have to win matches immediately in March. Um, so yeah, we'll see. I mean, what are going to be some keys for success for Eric Chelle to have success? Number one, I think you have to empower Victor Osimhen, give him a lot of responsibility. We saw that when Jose Peseiro did that, he arrived and he gave Osimhen a lot of responsibility, gave him the captain's armband, and I thought that it was clear to see that Osimhen led the team, not just by yelling and stuff like that, but even on the pitch, the amount of effort that he put in really motivated, I think, the rest of his teammates. So I think first thing you have to do, make sure you're on good terms with Victor Osimhen. Unlike, for example, I think it was Finidi George that wasn't on good terms with him. And make sure you empower him, okay? Because there are some players you need to go up there and you need to sort of suck up to them and make sure they're on your side. And there are other players you can be hard with. I think Osimhen, make sure he's on your side and empower him. Tell him you need him. He needs to lead Nigeria. Second thing I would do is make sure that Nigeria is well balanced. We remember sort of during the Gernot Rohr times, Nigeria at times, remember they were playing with like a 4-4-2 that was almost like a 4-2-4 because they were trying to shoehorn all of these strikers on and they didn't have enough midfielders. And at times they look really unbalanced. And I think before anything, Jose Peseiro, what he did really well was make sure that Nigeria defended well and that they were balanced. Um, if that means you have to play lesser players um, in certain places and you have to leave some stars on the bench, make sure that that is the case before you try to shoehorn all of these great players and you end up with a lopsided formation. But that going on to the next step, that really is the biggest challenge for Eric Shell is can you find a system where everyone is involved? And if you don't play everyone, can you ensure that they remain engaged and motivated? This has been the biggest problem for Nigeria over the last 5 years. We talked about how Gernot Rohr was trying to shoehorn everybody in. You have players like we don't. I don't need to go through the list of Nigerian strikers, but Osimhen, Victor Boniface, blah 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 blah. You have Adamola Lookman now. You have Moses Simon, and then there seems to be a lack of top quality central midfielders, or especially yeah. I mean, you have Ndidi, but they've been playing Iwobi back there, and that seems a little bit unnatural. So they played that 5-4-1 at the AFCON, for example. That seemed to cater to everybody's strengths. But you had to leave Victor Boniface on the bench. But that he didn't become like a cancer in the locker room, right? He was still found ways to keep him engaged. Um, so can you find a system where Nigeria is balanced, they're defending well, like they did under Pesero, Osimhen is empowered, and at the same time, people are engaged even if they're on the bench? I think those are the biggest challenges that Eric Schell is going to have to face. Now, the one thing that gives me a little bit of optimism is that Eric Schell had to face similar challenges with Mali. Mali also have imbalances. They have 10 central midfielders, like maybe one striker, and then they have lacking a little bit of quality in defense as well. So they're almost like if Nigeria is like an hourglass with a lot of strikers, few midfielders, a lot of defenders, I would say that Mali are more like a big round ball or something like that. Not enough strikers, lots of midfielders, and not enough defenders as well. But what he did at the AFCON was he found a system that worked. He played a 4-4-2 that was a diamond, so he got managed to get four central midfielders on pitch, but it wasn't imbalanced. It was still very much balanced. One of the two strikers that he played with would come back and sometimes fill in when they were tracking back, ensure that they were covering their width. When you look at a center half like Sekou Niakate, who started all of the matches at the AFCON, he's very good at putting the ball on the ground, like Moussa Niakate as well from Senegal. They're very good at getting the ball on the ground and playing these long passes between the lines, and that's what they did time and time and time again. So what I saw that Eric Schell did with Mali that really impressed me was that he found a way to put his best players on the pitch while ensuring that Mali were still balanced, and that's going to be the biggest challenge of Nigeria, in my opinion. So yeah, overall, is this a good hire? I'm 50-50 on it. Sorry, I'm kind of sitting on the fence. I think there were better options out there. Uh, I mean, I don't know Nigeria's budget. I don't know. I haven't obviously interviewed the candidates as the NFF has, but I'm talking speaking from an outsider's perspective. Um, why not Aliou Cissé, for example? Because I was the first thing that popped into mind is the language problem, but Eric Shell doesn't speak that much better English than Aliou Cissé does, right? And Aliou Cissé speaks some decent English. He played in England. Um, Sunday Olise is a name that comes to mind that I think should be finally given his chance with the Nigerian Super Eagles, no? Um, and then if you're gonna bring in a foreigner, swing for the fences, you know, bring in a foreigner that could work as well. So yeah, it's one of those where Eric Shell could work, but me personally, I'm not sure that he knows the Nigerian terrain well enough. Media, players, league. I'm not sure that he is a good enough communicator in English. I'm not sure that he's dealt with this much pressure in a job before. I don't think he has. And he's not, like I said, he's not Nigerian. So if he was Nigerian, all of those questions would be sort of would have been answered. And that's what gives me some hesitation. But one of the reasons why I do have optimism, as I mentioned, with Mali, he faced similar problems in trying to balance a side that has a lot of quality in one area of the pitch, and he managed to do it, and he managed to get Mali further than they've been in a decade or so. So yeah, overall, I'm 50-50 on this one. I don't think it was the best coaching hire. If you're gonna hold my feet to the fire right now and say, will Nigeria qualify for the 2026 FIFA World Cup under Eric Chelle? I would say no, simply because South Africa are in full flow, and they're the hottest, one of the hottest teams on the continent, and the way that the players are playing in South Africa, and especially with the club football, I don't think that Nigeria have enough. And especially since the match that they have to play against one another is going to be in South Africa, they already played in Nigeria. I would say Nigeria probably won't qualify. That would feel wrong. I feel like we need to have Nigeria at a World Cup. It would feel wrong to go with 10 national teams to the Americas and not have Nigeria there, particularly as I mentioned because of the diaspora that's there. But yeah, uh, it all starts in March. So personally, I think better options were on the table. But this isn't a horrible option, but simply because he faced similar problems with Mali and he managed to solve those. So yeah, just wanted to put my thoughts out there. Let me know what you guys think. I know a lot of Nigerian people on this channel don't really think that I like Nigeria. It's not the case. You're gonna say you're pessimistic about Nigeria again, but let me know what you think. Are you happy with the hire or not? Um, if so, why? And if not, why? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll be responding to all the comments as they come in. Anyways, speak to you all in a few days as we preview the sixth and final match day of the African Champions League. Take care, all. Peace.